I got a pair of Brunners for you. Somehow or another, John Brunner, science fiction author, English guy, has stuck in my head as someone I really, really like. I looked up his I don't know is it a bibliography? I'm trying to remember, because I think they talk about discography. Like, a bibliography is usually a list of books, but it's ones having to do with the subject, not somebody's authorship. But then again, when they talk about discography, it's usually not referencing, but rather things that artist has done. So I guess bibliography would be the right word if discography is derived from it that way. Anyhow, I looked through that, and there was only one I was sure that I had read, which is The Long Result, something I gave to my first wife, along with almost everything that I had science fiction and fantasy-wise. And I don't remember shit about it. I had him confused with Stapleton. I thought Brunner had written Odd John, but no. Which is a story that I do remember some of, at least. Don't have a copy of it. These are just two examples. I managed to pick these guys up at the little free library. These, I think, were published in the 80s, maybe? Well, this one's 72, but it was actually first written in 63. And it may have been written not... See, it was published under Listen the Stars. Now it's the Stardroppers. And this one is just a straight-up copyright of 81. No, wait. It was serialized in New Worlds in 63. This one's actually surprising in terms of the predictions it makes. Some of the stuff having to do with like satellite transmission, using satellites for phone and everything. Nothing that wasn't, clearly on the horizon, but certainly wasn't as prevalent at that point. I don't know when we started using satellites for phones heavily. I know Clark was the one who kind of came up with the idea of it and is credited with that, but I'm sure they were working on it by 63. Anyway, both of these have a storyline, right? It's kind of hard. So for me, these are kind of the kind of science fiction that I love. This is really the stuff that I love. It's a little bit bigger than, it's bigger than a novella even, really. These clock in, not big for a book, but 150 pages, I think, each, about, on average. 160 for this, 140 for this. But anyway, a nice size to digest. You can tell a good story in that length of time. It's not like, some of the short stories, especially the really short shorts, are like, a few paragraphs with a twist or something like that. This is not like that. It allows you to develop a little bit more, to tell the whole story, but not just drag it out forever like more modern books tend to do, and not worry about all kind of character development and all that. Although honestly, this one has a little bit in it. Both have a little bit, but not a hell of a lot. It's more there, I guess, to facilitate the story. And everything kind of merges nicely together. Nothing jumps out at you. So like with the Heinlein, with the Glory Road, look, the story felt kind of like schlock. The writing, there was like a little twist in it or whatever, maybe kind of, sort of. it didn't really feel all that important. Like it didn't feel like the story was constructed to get you to that, the way these guys do. And was there character development in it? I don't know. I mean, there's always some, right? But the main purpose with Glory Road felt like being a vehicle for kind of making a particular a set of cultural observations and whatnot. Maybe I'm just looking at it the wrong view. But here, it feels like everything's kind of integrated. The story is at a certain level. The characters, you don't really care too much about the characters. Maybe a little bit. This one a little more than the other. And then he is an English author, and the artwork on these is very English. Like this looks like, Raj period soldier coming forward, and this one guy in a bowler hat, right? I don't know if Dawes was an English company. No, that's New York, as is this. So yeah, I mean, the idea of putting a very, very British look on it may have been kind of a signature that they used for Brunner books because he was an English author. But again, everything feels very nicely integrated in the sense that like the story takes up its own part and is interesting and good in and of itself in each case. The character development and caring about the characters is pretty limited for the most part. Like I said, a little bit more in this, but not much. And then both of them also project, but it almost feels natural to the story. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like everything's stretching to try to get to any kind of cultural statement or anything. Let me give you a brief, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing about it all, is it's all nicely integrated. It reads well. It's a good little story. It's a decent length. You're not plowing through it. You're not making a huge commitment. But let me give you a briefie on the stories of this one, of these two. To Conquer Chaos, you're looking at it from a couple of different characters' points of view. At first, a military expedition to go out and seek this kind of deadlands. It's called Borderlands or whatever. It's basically a desert from which monsters come. But then you also look at the point of view of a townsman who lives near that, and is kind of looked down on by his town. He's a soap maker or something. Well, he is. And then finally, later, as you go further and further into it, you get into a community that's living on the edge within the borderlands and is trying to maintain the defenses, let's just say, there. And I don't want to give anything away particularly. I feel like I've already done too much. In a way, things are just sort of trickled to you. Information comes at you at a slow and steady pace in a way that it's not, it's not like there's just a giant twist at the end or anything like that. In fact, it's all very predictable. I got no problem with that. There doesn't have to be a huge twist in it. There are a few little, things that are like, oh, this is kind of a gotcha, but they're so telegraphed that it's not really. It's something that, like, if you read too quickly, maybe you'd miss it, but otherwise, you pretty much are going to predict these things. And it's kind of like, it kind of reminds me of writing unit tests and getting them to work and then seeing them work every time. It's just kind of like this, yep, I was right about that, kind of thing. But anybody's going to get these. Anyway, I found it an enjoyable read, no problem. Definitely keepers, just because they're Brunners, if nothing else, because I'm sure I read a couple of his short stories, maybe other stuff in collections. I'm just not positive the names of the things. And then, so what was interesting about this was this projection of kind of what would happen to human societies in these different kind of situations. And it doesn't really feel a hell of a lot like science fiction to begin with at all, because you're dealing with the initial army is, they have swords and stuff like that. They also have guns. The city or the town that they visit is less technologically advanced. That technology came from the exploration that's going on here to some extent. And then the final group is kind of dealing with old technology that they don't understand that they're maintaining. There is sort of a twist to it as to why information's being passed in the way it is and everything. But it's nothing too huge, and it was kind of interesting and everything. But it would make the whole book would make like a Star Trek episode or something like that. It could be condensed into that size. There's not a whole hell of a lot going on here. I enjoy reading something this size more than I would enjoy a smaller one. Stardroppers was a little interesting as well in terms of the storyline and everything. Again, it meshed well together. Character development, again, really minor thing in it. In both cases, I would say sort of, I don't know how to put it, ESP type psionics, whatever you want to call it, type of things seem to factor into it to some extent. In this particular case, it's, a technological device is built and it generates what appear to be some kind of undecipherable messages from the beyond. And really the main character is worried about keeping world peace in what's going to be the 1980s, but this was written in the 60s, and some sort of projection of that. So it's not that far ahead. There are a couple of advances there, some of which had been gotten to, some of which hadn't. So like the satellite communications for phone, that was incorporated in. Of course, satellite communications already existed. I just don't think it was being used for commercial telephone by '63. But that's a clearly easy thing to project. Another thing that it projected in there was flat screen TVs as kind of one of the that was a new invention at that point. Well, the reality is they weren't around yet, or at least not anywhere near economically viable. But I think they just weren't around. Well, by the 80s, they certainly weren't in the 60s. So the technology doesn't appear that hefty, except for this thing that just kind of accidentally was discovered by throwing some parts together by mistake. Not by mistake, but trying to get some other result. They got something weird out of it, and it looks into what sort of the psychological or the mass psychological impact would be of something like this. And there's very much a worry that various nations are going to see this as potentially too great a leap forward, and it might trigger a nuclear war or whatever. And from there, it just, it holds up pretty well. There are some interesting little personal points that happen in it that are kind of nice. true in both, but I think I felt it more in this. This one felt more like a schlock fantasy in terms of like the character development that you care about, which is the soap maker guy and whatever. He feels like, I don't know, like I don't remember. Will, I think, was his name in The Princess Bride. He's just, except that he's not being kicked around or whatever in the same way, but just sort of, way beneath what he hopes for. And then his development to become a hero of some sort. Kind of, sort of. But yeah, again, I found the writing really pleasant, easy to get through, doesn't get in the way, nothing fancy, no kind of, in-depth, like, let's look at the characters and what they're doing. None of the new wave science fiction type stuff that came in the later 60s. I did notice the same kind of, 1950s style that kind of stuck with Heinlein throughout. The sort of, in the case of this one, it was, somebody pats their secretary or, no, their wife on the butt to, like, get them to do something or like, thanks for the coffee, and pats her on the ass or whatever. Yeah, not just in a private moment, but like in front of a guest, which feels anachronistic as hell to me. But yeah, that was how it was. The weird thing with Heinlein, of course, is that he just keeps using that kind of way about things throughout characters who are, from a different era, and it just feels so out of place when you're reading, the stuff that he wrote later on. When you're reading the stuff from the 60s, yeah, okay, But yeah, I enjoyed these guys. I don't have a hell of a lot more to say. I would recommend Brunner if if you're willing to read what is really, what I'd call core science fiction type stuff, where it looks into the kind of the important thing to me is sort of that sociological aspect to science fiction. How would humanity as a whole react under these circumstances? And you really kind of get that. That's the investigation that his books, or at least these two, and I think The Long Result as well. I think that's just his flavor, and that's kind of like the Simak that I like. Same kind of thing. And it's also not heavy-handed. It doesn't go really hard into, like things like Asimov's psychohistory or anything. It doesn't really go hard into the idea of like talking about this kind of stuff. It's there. Just like the story's there, just like the characters are there. It all just sort of fits together, reads quickly, reads pleasantly, and none of it is unappealing to me. And that's kind of, to me, where I like my science fiction to be. It's easy reading, comfort food type of stuff. Fantasy usually doesn't get into that. It usually gets too much of the detail of the story or whatever, too worried about everything. I don't know if that's all Tolkien's fault with his massive, efforts, but it just tends to feel like you're looking at every single thing as if it's fucking, every day is important and everything. Here, yeah, every day is important in here, but in the way that like it would be during the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. It's very much looked at like the main character in it as an agent. One of the interesting things about this one is it looks at, it takes Britain as having pulled itself out of the Cold War by '83 and kind of made itself a third way type of country. In fact, maybe the only one in which, without going into any detail about the others, but in which it's just like, yeah, we're not really with the U.S. anymore, and we're not we're definitely not communists, and everybody doesn't, nobody trusts them at all because of this. It's kind of funny in that way. Like the U.S. is hurt by their withdrawal, and the communist countries don't trust them at all because they think it's some kind of trap or something. I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Anyway, these are guys I would recommend. I would recommend picking up Brunner if you see him or whatever. Not as sort of a, oh, this is something I got to hunt down because this is absolutely key to everything. But you know what? It's better than like 95% of science fiction that I've read. So I'd give it that much. It's not trying to be anything funky. It's not, again, it's not trying to do the weird stuff, the New Age stuff in science fiction did. It's not trying to be high literature or anything like that. But it's also not really trying, not trying to match into that sort of schlock John Carter type vein either. It's just, and it's not hard science fiction. It's just a good read that gives you a nice story in the view of a speculative event or situation. And I like it.